Hi, everyone, and good whatever moment of this wonderful day you are enjoying on your time zones. And welcome to yet another conversation, part of our The Inclusive Workplace April series. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co host for the next hour. We have, as usual, Jessa taking great care of us backstage. And I will just start off with thanking you all for patience and understanding with my Donald Duck voice. This is um, what I got after I lost the fight with the air conditioning over the weekend. And we will try to make the most out of our time today, talking about accessibility first, designing workspaces and workplaces for all abilities. First and foremost, I would like to welcome everybody in the audience for taking the time and curiosity to be here today. And a big request for help. Could you just start dropping a few comments? Just let us know maybe where you're listening from or where you're watching us from. And first, that will help us know that we are not stuck in some technical loop in LinkedIn. And it will also help us travel vicariously through your locations around the world. I will ask Jessa to help me bring our fabulous speakers on stage. And while they get used to seeing their faces next to one another, I will encourage everybody, do consider this conversation open. Use the chat generously. Let us know your own opinions, your own thoughts, your own take, your own stories on this topic, because this is how we grow, learning from each other and keeping the conversation alive. Now, I will keep my blabathon as short as possible. And what I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen, clockwise. And I will ask you to first, please just kindly, shortly introduce yourselves. And do let us know what makes this topic so personally meaningful to you that you decided to take the time and the energy to be here today. Yvonne, welcome. It's so good to see you.
Oh my, Manola, it's great to see you and to share this incredible platform with Lalita and Colin, two highly esteemed colleagues. So I'm looking forward to learning from you and from this audience and engaging in this important topic. So I am Yvonne Wolf. I join you from the United States in Boston, and I'm a four-time chief people officer and actually about to accept another one. So it'll be 5 times. But right now I have my own consulting practice called Your Talent Matters. And actually, Manola, to answer your point, that is the essence of why this matters to me, because I think when organizations leave any talent on the table, they're missing out. They're missing out on innovation. They're missing out on customer insights. And they're missing out on humanity. I think our workplace is that place where we can heal some of the divisions in this world. So I'm excited about this topic and can't wait to hear more. Thank you.
Thank you. Lalita, it's good to see you. Welcome into our conversation.
Thank you, Minola. Delight to see you. And hello, Colin, and hello, Yvonne. Really happy to be with you all. I basically am based in Hong Kong, and I am the moderator or the host. And today I've joined as a panelist. So there's a bit of trepidation, and there's also an excitement. What do? I basically am involved with organizational development and design, and DEI is very much part of that. And in my corporate career as an ex-investment banker, there have been many times where I was the odd one out, probably the only woman, the only Asian. And for me, therefore, inclusion, and as Yvonne beautifully said, humanity, I think they go together. And the sense of belonging matters. Rather than fitting in, we need to feel as if we belong to a place. And it should not be forced. And that's why this topic matters to me. I am a consultant running my own practice. I help with organizational development and design through coaching and facilitation. And an absolute delight to be here and looking forward to engaging with the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And making our panel wholesome, Colin, good to see you. It's been a while. I was looking forward to having you on a panel.
Oh, that's really kind of you to say. It's great to be here. I am Colin Mincy. My pronouns are he and him. I'm in New York City. It's a beautiful day here. And it's always a good day to be talking about equity and belonging. And I think those two words really will carry us throughout this conversation. Making sure that equity is more than what we speak about, but it's actually with intention, with commitment, with ownership, and with accountability that we are making hiring processes, workplaces, um, in all aspects, and decisions and assessments in equitable ways. And if we don't have intentional strategies on how we respond to folks with disabilities or who are part of our neurodiverse community, then we're not being equitable and we don't have the right DEI strategies. And the reason I'm here is because I remember this story about people not being able to be effective at home. And then this pandemic hit and everyone was forced to work from home. And then we started talking about stress and resilience and other things that we've been preaching about for a long time. And so I'm here to remind us that we should be caring about these things before it actually happens to us. And even though we may not have experience in needing support, it's our job as HR leaders to advocate for it when businesses don't.
Mm. What a great first round, and so many mental post-its already going up here, and we will go and collect each and every one of them. Now, before we move to discuss technicalities, I would really love to set a broader context. Now, whether that's aspirational, whether that's reality, I guess that's one layer of the conversation as well. But what does a truly, meaningfully, genuinely inclusive workplace look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And let's go popcorn style on this one, and we will follow the inspiration around the screen. Colin.
I'll start. I'll just say that because I have a sense on what my other panelists will say, but I will start just by saying that it looks like a strategy or a vision that that the organization from the top and from an HR perspective and a DEI perspective and a policy perspective and a governance perspective, I think what good looks like is a set plan on how we are going to attract, retain, nurture, and develop talent that is neurodiverse or talent, um, you know, or the talent marketplace of folks with disabilities. And I think that there's a commitment to not only attract and hire those folks, but support them and be inviting and culturally and psychologically supportive and aware, and that we're advocates, safeguarding folks from further harm in the workplace, and that we have in our general counsel's office and our HR's office a set of accountability measures on the HR side on how to teach and coach folks around language and the importance of accessibility and having the right attitudes and accountability when folks don't want to bring those attributes to the workplace. That's what good looks like to me. Anything less than that, I think, is lip service.
Thank you. Yvonne.
Yeah, I love that, Colin. And just to build off of your point there, I love your point about where we're caring about things before they happen. And I also want to just highlight your point about leadership, because when I think about an inclusive work environment, it really does start with the leadership. Are they creating a space? We've been talking forever about authenticity. I like to add to it humanity-centered authenticity, so that we're actually being authentic in a way that also cares about other people. And when we have leaders who role model that, they're creating the safe space for other people to show up and role model the same way. Like if a leader is abusive and uncaring, you tend to see that behavior in other parts of the organization as well. And Colin, you also mentioned the whole infrastructure piece. How's the general counsel, how's human resources showing up? Our policies saying everybody's abilities matter. And when we do that, and Lalita, you kind of highlighted on this point about humanity, we're practicing behaviors around empathy and care. And going back to your point, Colin, about caring about things before they happen, the interesting thing, this is what I love about inclusion space, is it really does benefit all. So the example you gave about COVID, right, or the pandemic, when we moved into a space, we had neurodiverse people that said, look, I don't want to be on camera all day. This is just too much for me. I was a CHRO at the time, and that is where I heard it from. When we introduced a policy that said you did not have to have your cameras on, and when we started adding the script in Zoom meetings, like everybody said, this is great. I don't have to take notes anymore. I can download. So it was great for the neurodiverse people and people who, would benefit from having, the script to reflect on later, but everybody benefited. So that's why I'm really excited about this space. So just to answer your question a little more succinctly, Manola, a place that is inclusive is one where everybody gets to show up as a full, authentic selves, centered in humanity, and feeling valued and appreciated, where their voices can be heard and their ideas can be used.
Yeah, and to build on that, the fact that the language we use, and I don't mean Chinese or Indian or English, but the words we choose to use, the tone, and the behaviors count, because we all have days where we are preoccupied with things, and just allowing people to show up, create that space where people can share and feel safe to share, rather than it just being a script. And I think it also matters, many organizations possibly have policies and procedures which are outdated, which are possibly not even being looked at. And I think it's important to review it. What's my workforce like? How can I update it? How can I make sure that the things that we didn't look at in the past are considered today? And also equal importance to education and training, not a DEI training just being a tick in the box, but really it to be meaningful. How can I support people who may have difficulty in understanding some of this training? How can I make it sustainable? I think all of that, and also creating maybe employee resource groups, a community where people feel I can go into this space and share. It's like my tribe. I think all of these are important to build on what Yvonne and Colin mentioned.
Can I just add one thing that Lolita just activated in me, and that is, it wasn't until I was working at Open Society Foundations in about 2017 that I really started to focus on disability inclusion and neurodiversity, and it's because I worked with Sarah Napoli, who is amazing and was a wonderful educator and mentor in this space when she came over to work in HR as a colleague focused on this. But I also had employees who I was an HR partner for their division, who I could see had something meaningful to contribute, but the dynamics of the environment impeded or made it more toxic for them to be able to do it, and that there needed to be greater infrastructure and understanding in order to create an environment of support. And so the other thing that we need to do, and I think it's okay to say this, please don't send me nasty letters, is HR folks have to educate themselves and care enough about this conversation as much as we care about getting W-2s out in January. And as much as we care about doing performance reviews every year and and executing that bonus payroll, if we are going to be in service to everyone, we need to have the foundational understanding and knowledge to be able to step up and put the right things in place and influence the organization to do the right things for these communities.
Mm.
And
Yvonne,
a
please.
point I would like to, if I may, Yvonne, sorry, may
Please go, please.
One thing I wanted to add was also to be culturally sensitive, because global organizations across the world, be it Asia, US, wherever, there are many cultures, and the way we speak, the way we address someone, the way we literally knowing the cultural sensitivity of it may be a really small thing, but that makes a difference to somebody because that's been their culture, that's been their upbringing. And I think these little acts make a big difference in how a person shows up and how a person feels. And I think that's probably many times forgotten by many people within organizations. May not be all. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Lalita, I think you are so right. In fact, to connect your idea, I think when we talk about ableism, which is the I think the appropriate terminology that's accepted, or also I'm hearing disability inclusion is another term I've seen. I've seen, people talk about DEIB, ability and belonging. So there are ways to include the language. But what you really touched on, as I was doing a little research for this, is the whole notion of not viewing people who have any form of a disability as a disadvantage, and don't think of them as victims. Think of them as talent. And again, let's go back to what we talked about in the very beginning. Let's not leave talent on the table. So in the US, 50 million people, they call it the third largest market segment, identifies having some form of a disability. Because this is a global audience, I looked up in the UK with the CIPD, which is another organization I follow. 9.5 million in the UK are consider themselves disabled, yet only 5.1 are in the workplace. So almost half are not showing up in the workplace. So we're talking about this war for talent, and we're leaving talent on the table, right? So leveraging this talent is really about casting a wider net, and looking at underutilized talent pools, as I like to think about that. And Accenture did a whole study. We know the whole thing about diversity actually contributes to higher revenue and higher profits. But they did a study, if anybody wants to look it up, it's Accenture's Getting to Equal the Diversity Inclusion Advantage. And they found 28% increase in revenue and 30% increase in profit. And, you think about that, that's about people at the table who are identifying new customer revenue streams, new ways to show up in the market, in addition to what they're doing in the workplace in terms of promoting humanity and empathy and care. They're actually helping you think better. And I'm going to close out with a couple of I think, Colin, you talked about HR needing to really care about some of these practices. Oh my goodness, the resources that are out there. I downloaded a couple that I just want to highlight. One is called EARN. So anybody in the US, it's the US Employer Association Resource Network on Disability, literally has a manager's guide and will take you through everything you could do. And for those in the global world, CIPD partnered with Disability Confident, and they also have a practical guide for employers and for managers. So there's all these tools. So there's no excuse, right? These are free resources that we can download anytime. So no excuses. And talk about leadership. I just want to close with that point. You're going to see that's a theme with me. You know, Colin, I was at a conference recently, and we had two former governors speaking, a former governor from the US and from Boston, Massachusetts, and a former governor from New York. And that former governor from New York is blind, David Patten.
Yes, that's right.
And think about first of all, he was brilliant and funny. He could only go on the road. You did not see a victim. You saw a leader. You saw somebody creating spaces for other people. You saw humanity. You saw compassion. And I don't know what his cabinet looked like, but I'm willing to bet that people showing up unique in any way were embraced and accepted. Mm-hmm.
I totally love the energy of this conversation, and I love how we constantly expand the topic. And I would invite the three of you, and also I would invite everybody in the audience, because just as you all highlighted, there are so many nuances across cultures. I can also think about nuances across other intersectionalities that we have in the workplaces. But we touched a little bit on other stakeholders, on other actors around this topic, and I'm absolutely convinced that it won't take a lot of effort for any of us to think of conversations where the reflex was, oh, accessibility first, that's an HR topic. So I would invite all of you to dismantle this misperception and this incredible pitfall that is still the reality across many workplaces. So who basically comes into the conversation around accessibility first? And I would very much invite Lalita to be the pioneer on this slice of the conversation.
I'm reminded of a experience that a client of mine shared a while back. One organization in Hong Kong, basically every time a new boss came, and the boss changed probably once every 3 to 5 months, they rearranged the whole floor. And it became like musical chairs, where they had to, this client of mine had to move seats literally every a month or every 2 months. And the whole thing became so chaotic. I mean, this is pre-COVID days, but they're all back to office anyway. And the person just said, it just didn't seem right to me, because when I came to the office, I don't know whether I'll be sitting on the same seat. And then when the whole inquiry was done, everyone said, oh, it is HR's decision. It's the boss's decision. It is so-and-so's decision. So who is responsible? Unfortunately, none of the team members were asked, what would you like? Are you happy with your seat? What changes would you like? So the actual participants were not asked. People who are affected were not asked. And I genuinely think this is a joint decision. Some things is non-negotiable, whereas some other things can easily be collaborative, where each one's opinion is asked. We may not be able to listen to everyone's opinion, but at least the person feels they're asked, and then you decide, okay, we can take this into consideration, or we may not take this into consideration. So I don't think it is just HR responsibility or the business's responsibility. I think every stakeholder needs to be involved in the conversation, at least key stakeholders.
I mean, yeah, I think that's it, right? And that was brilliant. And I would say that, because this is the world we live in, and I think we're all HR people on here, and so it's the truth, is that the actual work of operationalizing this is probably HR's responsibility, or some combination of HR and DEI's responsibility, because I think we know that executive teams are not going to actually implement these things. But the responsibility does belong to everyone, right? And So at the executive leadership table, it's about setting the expectations that this is the organization we're going to be, and it's part of our values to make sure that people of all capabilities and abilities and identities can work here and feel safe and be supported and invested in. It is managers of teams' responsibilities to make sure that every interaction, every team meeting, the way how we're meeting, and the technology that we're using to stay connected is consistent with the needs of the full team. And as Lolita brilliantly pointed out, for those of us who don't know what it's like to live this experience, close your mouth, open your ears, listen to those who actually live this experience. And from that, whether it's through ERGs, as Lolita mentioned earlier, or as Yvonne mentioned, just creating safe spaces for those conversations, develop and action something that is responsive to the needs of the workforce, just like you would do for other communities and stakeholders. You should do for this community in particular, and care about it and learn about it and focus on it with the degree that it deserves. But it's everyone's responsibility. But I think it's HR's responsibility to make sure it is implemented within the organization.
Mm.
Yes, I love that, Colin. It is everybody's responsibility, and I even want to bring the board in on this. So I think as an HR leader, one of our, in addition to making sure we're developing the practices and implementing them, influencing some of the thinking. Making sure even at the board level, when we're talking about, do we have a talent pipeline, talking about strategies to diversify the talent pipeline. What about considering ableism in the candidate slates? Thinking about, there's also a study that Rutgers did a study, and they did it based on it was a joint with Rutgers and Syracuse. And they were talking about bias and how bias shows up in candidate selections. And while there's been this whole conversation about unconscious bias, so they've seen a little bit of a dip for unconscious bias or bias behavior that contributes to bad decision making. But the drop for people who are disabled in any way, it's been a much smaller decrease in that kind of bias. And then when Rutgers and Syracuse did the study, they found that a person was 26 less likely to be considered as an applicant if they had disclosed their disability. So I think what we need to do as HR leaders is diversify our candidate slates, really advocate. And I'd love to see it right at the leadership level. Again, to go back to that, so I gave the David Patterson example. I'm gonna give another one. I was a CHRO for a medical company, a biotech company, and one of our leaders was generally known to be on the spectrum, as was the language that we use. So he didn't really self-identify, but everyone kind of already knew that there were certain things that worked better for him so that he could think and contribute the best. And him being present at the leadership team, on the executive team, also gave credit and support to other people who were neurodiverse in any way. That's the same organization that said, look, we need cameras off. Too much. I'm just overwhelmed because of my neurodiversity. So I think you're going to see, this is sort of my thing. Let's make sure the leadership is fully committed. And how about if the leadership is actually role modeling examples of ableism? And in fact, another one, I used to work from, I'm going to give the name to this one. I used to work for Marriott, and I was working on the leadership pipeline there. So working on the succession to Mr. Marriott. And we actually considered all of his children. And one of his children is Steve Marriott. Steve Marriott was deaf and blind, which was really interesting. And he had equipment that allowed him to transcribe what's being talked about. So I had to discuss culture with him, which was really kind of interesting, because how do you talk about culture to somebody who is deaf and blind? And it was probably one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. But when we introduced equipment that enabled him to do his work as a leader in the most effective way, and when the organization knew he was even on the pipeline to succeed his father as CEO, I mean, I can't tell you what that did for people literally around the world about their ability to show up and talk about who they are and what makes them unique, and not to see it as a disadvantage, but as an organizational responsibility to embrace.
Mm. I cannot think of a more frustrating thing than realizing that we are in the middle of our time today. This could easily go on for at least 3 more hours with the three of you. And can we turn this inspiration and this energy in something also actionable for everybody in the audience? And I would invite you to share a few best practices that you have seen really making a difference in organizations. And the question is absolutely open. So think about best practices through whatever lens you feel most inspired to use. And Colin, could you lead us into this, please?
Yeah, so so something concrete that I would offer folks to consider. I call it the triple A: access, attitude, and adaptive technology. Right. You know, if we're going to benchmark salaries, we should be benchmarking um, our physical workspace, where we work, the events and the location of events that the organization selects for convenings. We should be really deliberate and thoughtful about making sure that accessible places are accessible to all of our employees, and that we are not creating events where people cannot actively participate. So that's really about access. The adaptive technology, with great respect and affection to all of our technical colleagues who keep us connected and our IT friends who keep us safe and secure. There are consultants and organizations that can help companies partner with their IT teams to look and do an audit about their technical infrastructure and opportunities and ways to strengthen access for prospective employees through the onboarding process, for the folks that we already have that we have to take care of, ways that we can help them stay connected and thrive and be present and feel included in conversations and meetings. And then the third A, which I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, is the attitude. And it is time that we, as organizations, stop obsessing about the intentions of the harmer and start centering on the experiences of the harmed. And so we have to educate and create a set of expectation and accountability that we are going to all have a foundational understanding of disability inclusion, of neurodiversity, of why accessibility is important, and of all of the ways that these things are not hindrances, these are value adds, so that we are creating mindsets that will help activate belonging when we bring folks with different kinds of needs into the organization. So 3A's: access, adaptive technology, and attitudes. And I think starting there is a really good, simple, concrete, comprehensive way to get started. Do not stop there, because then you will not have done the job, but it's certainly a good way to start.
Wonderful. Lalita.
Attitude is one of my favorites. And, often in Asia, people, not just Asians, but people living in Asia, in fact, even last week we were having a conversation. We are awake till very late for conference calls. And I think that is also needs to be considered to be inclusive. It's 5 p.m., possibly in the US, in many parts of Asia, it's an unearthly hour. It's 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or midnight. And talking about attitude, I remember when I was in my corporate life, one of the members in the team with whom we used to have a conference call regularly said, "Okay, we'll take turns. So for you, once a week, you do it this time. Next week, we will do it at this time, so that each one feels that they're not at a disadvantage. We all go through the pain of what it is to be waking up and doing meetings at 11 p.m. or 12 midnight." And I thought that was such a nice inclusive way, because we couldn't suit for everyone to be in the daytime. So why not take turns? And I thought that remains with me even today, because that was one person whose suggestion, we all actioned it. And Yvonne, you mentioned about leadership. This was a very senior leader in that organization. And he really role modeled that behavior by being part of that, not just talking, but actually saying, I'll also show up at a time that may not be convenient to me. That's the first example. The second example is I worked with an NGO about 3 years back. They still exist today, a relatively small NGO. And this NGO basically employs and also places, well, their aspiration and aim, and they have, places people who are differently able into organizations. So the way they do it is their employees are enablers, facilitators, who enable these people who are differently able. And they, in turn, the NGO itself employs them so that they walk their talk and really are showing the behaviors and role model those behaviors, as well as they actively work with many other organizations in Hong Kong in order to make sure that these people are recruited and placed in good jobs. And for me, that example again lives with me all through, because they're walking their talk.
Mm.
Yes, Lalita, I love that. That is a very nice practical application. Partnerships, expanding the sourcing that you're using to fill roles. And you're right, these partnerships, not only NGOs, they're also government agencies. And interestingly enough, the support around it. So your cost per hire actually goes down significantly when you tap into those, and you get a lot of support around making reasonable accommodations and things like that, so that it can be fully successful. And I also want to add on another example of what can be done, Lolita, that I think you even touched on this. You talked about ERGs. How about, I'm a huge fan of the employee experience. Like, I often ask employees to walk through the employee experience and let me know when it's working for them and when it's not, and what we can change. How about leveraging a differently abled ERG to look at the entire employee experience? And this is something you said earlier too, Lolita. Let them tell you what they need. Like, don't guess at it. Let them say what's working and what's not. Let's look at our application. Did the application on LinkedIn actually say that we're interested in differently abled people? Did it have an option for people to say, I could fill this out, but I need this reasonable accommodation to do it. I need to speak it instead of write it. Or I need, I was reading too that some of our language in our job descriptions are overly complex. And so for someone who is neurodiverse in any way, or that clear speak about what is really required about the job benefits people who may not have that language as their first language, maybe neurodiverse in some way. And guess what? Benefits everybody. Everybody benefits from knowing, okay, what are the 3 things I really have to get done in this job? So having someone actually help you walk through, having, differently able people help you walk through the entire employee experience. How are you? So this is even expanding on your point, Colin, about technology. I love your access. How about access to all the people practices too?
Yeah. Yes.
As I was sitting here and listening to everything that we talked about so far, I must admit that I got curious about something. And what triggered this curiosity was the fact that um, we made already several calls for educating ourselves.
Yes.
Now, if we take a few minutes and sit within the dimension of HR, what would be some of the critical skills and capabilities that you would recommend HR professionals to expand on and to hone on to be able to advance this conversation? And you probably know by now that I always put a spin to this question. There's always extra ice cream for skills that are not immediately coming to mind. And let's just do this popcorn style again.
I love that you talked about what we need to do in HR, because one of my favorite, so I'm a huge fan of this whole notion of course, unconscious bias and things like that. And what Mazarine and company that kind of developed the tool that helps you become aware of some of your biases. I love this quote that they once said, that the fair-minded people are more likely to make bad decisions that impact people negatively. So what often happens in HR is we give ourselves a pass. We go and we focus on the leadership team and everybody else, and we haven't even done our work to unpack our own biases and how we're showing up. And you think about, this is a very controversial statement, Colin, I'm gonna get hate mail on this one. I always say we wouldn't even need DEI if HR did its job. Like, what are we creating a space for some people or for all people? So
That's
this
right.
whole practice came up because we were creating systems that only worked for some people.
That's right.
So therein lies, I'm really glad you asked this question, Manola, because we've got to do our work first. And as I said, it's not hard. You can go right out on the internet. You can even ask Chat GPT. By the way, I asked Chat GPT for a little bit of a learning session. They popped out a really nice, here are the best practices, here's what you need to do. But again, the organizations that I mentioned, EARN in the US and CIPD with the Diversity Confident, they have they have videos, they have worksheets. I mean, there is no excuse. We just need to decide that we need to unpack our own biases and strengthen our own learning first before we go and ask everybody else to do it. So thanks.
Absolutely. I think it starts with self, and the self-awareness, and it's easy to preach to others. Everything starts with self. And I would say trainings are important, but more than that, conversations, human resources, having conversations, going and sitting in with different people, seeing what they're experiencing, what's the conversations among them like, where can we make changes? Because when we facilitate workshops, we do role plays, but when we actually see the real life experiences, that's where we can pick up and really determine, okay, what is happening here? Where do I create that shift? How do I create a difference? What kind of conversations can I have? What kind of trainings or education can be provided? And that's one of my favorites, because this the shadowing, I mean, this is not shadowing, but similar to shadowing, where if you want to learn about somebody's experiences, you actually go and sit and observe them. And I did this master's in change at INSEAD, where one of the practicum assignments is you go and shadow a classmate of yours in silence, and you ask yourself, you have to write notes on what's going on within you, what have you learned, what did you observe, what would you do different. And I think that's a great experience, because you really learn on the ground as to what's happening.
Colin.
I'm gonna go even further than Yvonne did and just ask us to step back and consider the fact that we are here because we have to have a conversation, because this work isn't being done and hasn't been done in organizations across, that's my cell phone, across our workplaces. And it's not because, and back to the point earlier about intentions, it's not because it's not, HR doesn't think it's important. It's because in the myriad of other things, we make the choice that we're not going to focus on it. And that might be harsh, but it's true. And every journey begins with a single step. So you don't have to be a subject matter expert. You don't need expensive consultants. You just need a made up mind that folks who require support, whatever that might be, that they're part of the people you serve and are responsible for too. And if that is your testimony of how you want to be an inclusive leader, then your job is to first educate yourself so that you can become the effective advocate you're supposed to be, and use your influencing skills to make sure that leadership understand the importance of meeting this moment as well.
I love that. By the way, Colin, that was not your cell phone. That was a mic drop.
That was I might have been pounding my fist on the table. So so you might be right.
Yeah, but you're so right, because both of you, Colin and Lolita, Colin, you did the A's. I'm gonna do the C's. I heard you talk about curiosity, Lolita.
Yes.
We have to be curious, right? And Colin, I heard you talk about we need to be capable, right? And I want to add, we need to be courageous.
Yes.
Because if we're not willing to have this conversation for the organization so that work can get done, you are so right, Colin. Whose fault is it that this work is not being done?
And the other C is, which Lolita brought up before, is conversations.
And compassion.
HR people, please get out of your meetings and actually engage with the people you're supposed to be supporting. That's where we learn. That's where we get the feedback, the good, bad, and the ugly, and that's where we learn about people's experiences, and we can use that to action on things that will make people's experiences better.
Lalita.
So just a quick point. Yeah, Amy, thank you for Amy from our audience. Thank you for saying that most of us prefer being referred to as people with disabilities or disabled rather than differently able. We shall remember that. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for taking the courage to point that out.
Thank you very much, Lalita, for picking that up. I do want to use the about 10 minutes. We're about 13 minutes away from sadly saying goodbye. But I do want to create a bit of space and grace for something that I realized a few months back. And that is, many times, many people in our audience, they live in the reality of an HR function of one. And I would invite all of you, Yvonne, Lalita, and Colin, if we can give some recommendations or some advice, or if we can go back and highlight some of the points that we already made through the lens of an HR function of one. How can someone living in that workplace reality maybe pick their battles, create alliances, create what I oftentimes call in my change work a network of Wi-Fi boosters? So how can they be at their most meaningful in this space with everything coming at them? Who wants to jump in? Yvonne.
I'll start. And I know Colin and Lolita is going to take this to a much bigger space, but I've been in HR of one and I've been in HR of 150, right? So I've had resources and I've had none. But I speak from experience on this. I always say the first thing we have to do is make sure we really understand the organization strategy and mission, and attach the human capital agenda to that strategy and mission. So we're not coming at the leadership team asking, or the board saying this is important because we care about it only. We're saying it's important because it's going to get you results. It's going to get you to deliver on the strategy and things like that. So that's always been my jam, is to take the human capital agenda, which I know what works in terms of, bringing on board the right people, making sure people are in jobs, making sure people are developed, making sure people are paid equitably and fairly, those kinds of triggers. But I always use it in a language that connects back to, and that's how we're going to win. That's how we're going to increase market share. This is how we're going to, save money, whatever the goal of the organization is. So I think and then the other point that I already kind of shared is there are amazing resources free, especially this topic about differently abled. And thank you so much, Lalita. You had been role modeling that, and I do appreciate the speaker getting into the chat. So once again, there are tons of resources out there. You don't need, Colin said it, you don't need consultants and things like, not to say there's anything wrong with consultants, but you can get this information right there out there to educate yourself, including really great tools. I almost wish other spaces of inclusion had this level. I was amazed at how concrete and specific and how supportive, everything from one pagers to full guides to actual tips to links to organizations you could partner with. I mean, everything is right there, just a few clicks away.
Mm.
I would say for human resources are often overwhelmed, stressed out, because they're always in the service of others. They're doing a lot of the admin jobs, and they don't make time for themselves. They don't create that space where they can reflect, they can think. It's like, often I have conversations with human resources and I tell them, you need to put the oxygen mask for yourself first before you try to help someone else. And I think that partly comes, at least from my experiences being in non-HR, I think partly that comes from HR being taken as an admin role in many organizations, HR being dumped with things to do rather than, contributing to how can I help the business. They are a partner with us, though there is HRBP. And I think so it starts with self-care first, creating that space, and also really being courageous enough to say we are capable of a seat on the table and we want a seat on the table and we're willing to create that value, and this is how we can and we will add value. I really think that is important, because then the conversations that HR has will matter and will be respected.
I am taking a different approach, not because I don't agree, but because you're actually talking to someone who has burned out and understands all of the things that it means to have a really full plate and not have the capacity and the resources and sometimes the strength to be in all of the places that we're called to be. And it is unfair, but it's the job. And the when you ask the question about what do I say to the one person HR team, I say fight your battles and prioritize the things that you can move forward and fight the fights you think that you can win. But on the back of this conversation is the fact that I am reminded that on a daily basis, people who are differently abled, whether that is invisibly or visibly, either have to hide these things and work extra hard and beyond what they need to because they're not in supportive places. And I'm reminded of the fact that people feel othered and treated differently and excluded. And I'd take being overwhelmed any day if it means making the experience for someone at work to be one that makes them feel safer and poured into and cared about and part of a larger community. So I am sympathetic and empathetic to our plight. We've been saving organizations since the pandemic, but we still need to keep having conversations like these. By the way, Amy, thank you for the feedback. So that we can grow stronger, both as a network of practitioners, but as the people that folks are looking to stand up for them and support them and advocate for them.
Yeah. Well, with just 5 minutes left, I would really love to hear, with everything going on, and if you look at the conversations that are unfolding around you and that you are part of within your organizations, what gives you inspiration and what keeps you committed? And what is that makes you say, if I will have one extra drop of energy left, I will put it into this fight? Yvonne.
Actually, Colin kind of touched on it. For me, it's looking at this world that is becoming increasingly divisive. It's to the point, honestly, where I'm looking for an escape plan out of the US. I'm considering other continents because it's so divisive. And what gives me energy is the workplace, is the one place where no matter all of our things that divide us can be put aside for what unites us. And we need everybody, differently abled, you know, sexual orientation, age, race, gender. We need everything and everybody at the table, because there just aren't even enough. There's not enough talent to address the challenges of this world. So we need everybody in the game. And I believe the workplace has this opportunity to be a place that demonstrates humanity when we are at a very divisive point in our history.
Thank you. Lalita.
I think for me, the most important is being human. I know that sounds common sense, and unfortunately, in the divisive world that we live in today, it's often not found, especially in big cities, in very big organizations. We all want to achieve, we all want to be overachievers, and sometimes we forget being human. Because I think being human, having conversations, can take us to places and create places which are safe, which are inclusive.
Thank you. Colin.
Top of mind for me, by the way, my business manager is yelling at me because I didn't introduce myself. But my name is Colin Mincy, and I'm the Chief Engagement Officer of a consultancy called Going Beyond the Work. And the answer to your question is that the problem that we have in HR is that everyone with a leadership title is not necessarily a leader. And the consequences of not having the credibility and the authority to lead always falls on our shoulders. And I have lots of ideas on that subject, but that's why we burn out. That's why we're so stressed, is because there's a plate that we have to move things off of, and we have to manage people's teams for them. And we have to tell people why what they said isn't the right way to say it. And we have to remind people that they should be having one-on-ones and telling people that more of the same is not an acceptable way to fill out a performance review. And so we are coaches and cheerleaders and activists, and we're tired. And I think it's okay to say that. And so when we think about this conversation and practical ways that we can design accessible workplaces, I recognize it feels like just another thing. But it's it's something to someone. And I'm just, what I said before, I think empathy, particularly in this divisive moment we find ourselves, as Yvonne mentioned, what just putting ourselves, what it must be like to have to show up every day, and not be given the support we need, or that we give other communities to be successful. That's, if that's not a call to action, then we're probably not in the right profession.
Yvonne, Lalita, and Colin, I knew this conversation would be amazing, but it proved to be inspiring and validating and healing beyond expectations. Definitely one of my absolute favorites of all time. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for being here. I hope that you will take a lot from this conversation, and we will all make a better, brighter difference around us. Thank you. And thank you also, Jessa and Enrique, for making this possible and taking care of us. I hope I will get to welcome many of you very, very soon. And until then, accessibility first. Thank you.
See you all.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Manoa.
Thank you.